All right, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sara Agak. I work for Laborex Kenya as the Operations Director and Company Pharmacist. And I will just take you guys briefly through some of the disruptions which occurred during the COVID pandemic and what this means for inventory management. So it's briefly take you through, sorry. You'll allow me to stop sharing and then to share again because my slides are not. Okay, my slides are not moving. Just give me a second. Okay, there we go. So we'll just go through broadly what inventory management is and supply chain management is, and what safety inventory is, or what we call buffer stock, and then of course have a take-home message. So the outline will just basically be a few definitions, not all definitions, why we need to have inventory management, the various stages of supply chain, what the supply chain disruptors are, because after all, that's what my presentation is about, what safety inventory is and factors that influence safety inventory and how you can plan for safety inventory. And then of course, once the disruptors have been sorted out, how you need to reduce or how you can reduce your safety inventory. So I'd like us to take a different approach in terms of how we look at inventory management and not just look at it in terms of stock. Let's look at it in terms of availing the product to the end user or to the client. If we have this perspective, then it will assist us in understanding more the impact of the supply chain disruptors and how you can handle supply chain disruptors. And then of course, supply chain is, persons or organizations who directly or indirectly satisfy the client's needs, meaning ensure that the product reaches the end user. And then safety inventory, as I said, which is also known as buffer stock, is what you have forecasted for additionally, or what you will have at the point of replenishment, not what is replenished, but what you will have at the point of replenishment. And then the other definition, which would be of importance as we go through the presentation, is the lead time. So lead time is basically the time it takes from when you place an order to when you receive your goods. So why inventory management? And the most important thing about inventory management, as I said, if we don't look at it from a perspective of stock holding, we look at it from a perspective of meeting the client needs, then it's ensuring that continuous or that constant availability of product to the client. And another aspect of of inventory management is with respect to the stock itself. So how you manage your stock. So do you do the cycle counts? Do you do the random counts? Do you do the stock takes? Do you track and trace your safety stock? Do you track and trace your distressed stock? So before we go into what the supply chain disruptors are, I'd just like us to briefly go through the supply chain stages. And the thing that we have to keep note of the supply chain stages is that it doesn't have to follow this cyclical flow. It doesn't have to be from supplier to manufacturer to distributor to retailer to client. It can also be from client to supplier, or supplier directly to the client, or it can be from the supplier to the distributor. But the key thing here is that what must or what connects these stages is the product flow, is the information flow, and of course is money. They say that money makes the world go round, yeah? So money also makes products go round, or money also makes the supply chain go round. And the reason why I want us to keep in mind why it will not necessarily follow this cyclical way, and why you can have a direct supply from the manufacturer to the client, or the supplier to the client, is because these are the things which lead to supply chain disruptions. And these are the things which, when you are addressing supply chain disruptions, should come into mind. So I hope by now we can visualize a few of the things which would come into mind. For example, how to handle e-commerce, how you'll handle your product flow information, how you'll handle the information flow itself, and of course, how you'll handle the money. So what are some of the supply chain disruptors? Of course, there was the pandemic itself. If raw materials are not available, it means you can't make a product. So product means you can't avail the product to the client. So that means you can't meet the client needs. What we saw during the pandemic was unavailability of either shipping vessels or flights. That means longer lead times. That means, there were instances of going out of stock because we didn't have the stock. And this basically means that we are very reliant on imported products, which is a risk. So I hope anyone in the local manufacturing industry here is keeping an eye on this. The other supply chain disruptor is product substitutes. And this is, brand versus brand or generic versus generic. And, giving an example of paracetamol, I give you a different type of paracetamol versus the paracetamol that the doctor prescribed. Then changes in treatment guidelines, which will interrupt the supply chain in form of, if we have moved to a different treatment guideline, let's say diuretics are no longer, the first choice or the drug of choice, and it's a different class of antihypertensives that have been put as the drug of choice. Of course, this is going to have an effect in terms of your stock holding. It's also going to have an impact in terms of the product availability, because it means you will have to change what you used to keep to satisfy the new client needs. Then as a company or as a pharmacy or as a chemist, what are your policies when it comes to replenishment? Do you replenish when you're at zero? Do you do just in time? Do you replenish when you have minimum stock holding? What is your policy with respect to that? Then, as I mentioned, there's the product flow, there's information flow, and there's the cash flow, which can be heavily disrupted. And then if you have a new market entrant, and on the flip side, you have an exit of existing brands, that definitely disrupts the supply chain and then product recalls. So what am I saying about supply chain disruptors or disruptions? Don't panic, like many of us did during the pandemic and went and bought lots of tissue. You don't have to do that. There is a way in which you can handle the disruptions, and this is where the safety inventory comes in, or the buffer stock comes in. So the purpose or the role of safety inventory is to have that continuous supply of product availability where there is demand and supply uncertainty. And if you focused well and you have buffer stock or you have safety inventory, then kudos to you, because in case there's an increase in demand, you can handle that because you already have your safety stock. In case your supply arrives later than you expected, you're good to go because you already have your safety inventory. So basically what we're saying here is to continue providing, that high level of product availability in cases of supply and demand uncertainty. That's where you need the safety inventory or the buffer stock. So what influences how much safety inventory you can keep? There's the holding cost. There's e-commerce. Like I said, you can have the supplier engaging directly with the client. So where the supplier engages directly with the client, what does that mean for us in terms of in retail or in terms of distribution or in terms of wholesaling? Because that whole chain is cut because you have direct contact between the supplier and the client. Then we have product substitution and the type of product in terms of the nature of the product. Is this a product which you can substitute? There are some yes, no, especially in chronic conditions. There are others where if it's just a common cold or it's just a headache, you can definitely substitute. Then as we go along, clients are requesting for more customization of the products, which leads to product increase product variety. So this, of course, will affect how much you can keep, because the more customization, the question you'll be asking yourself then is, do I keep, every customized product for every client? And of course, the answer will be no, because your inventory costs will be very high. Then where there's demand and supply uncertainty, this will affect your safety inventory. I mentioned the replenishment policy, when to reorder and how much you need to reorder. I also mentioned aspects of lead time. So you need to know your replenishment lead times and the lead time variability, in the sense that does this lead time keep changing, or is this lead time, let's say if it's 60 days, it's 60 days, or is it 60 days today, and then a month later it's 75 days, and then 2 months later it's 90 days? What does that mean with respect to your safety inventory? And lastly, a factor that will influence your safety inventory is the type of tools that you use, or the type of methods that you use for forecasting. So how do you go about planning for safety inventory? So first, you have to ask yourself a few questions. How much should I stock? What's the suitable level of product that I should have? How much do I need to ensure continuous product availability? And what actions should I take once everything has settled in terms of reducing the safety inventory? And this goes to both Dr. Anyona's presentation and also Bramwell's presentation in terms of data. You need data to be able to answer these questions. So I hope you keep data, because you really need to rely on your historical data when you're forecasting. Forecasting is, remember, not an accurate measure, but at least it allows you to be able to keep some buffer stock. So if you don't have any historical data, you don't know what your run rate is, then you will have a very big issue when it comes to safety inventory, especially where there is a disruption in supply chain, which we all went through during the pandemic. So what does this mean then? If your fill rate increases, it means you have to increase your safety inventory. If your demand for the product increases, it means you have to increase your safety inventory. If the lead time increases, it means you have to increase your safety inventory. And if there's uncertainty in terms of periodic demand, again, this means you have to increase your safety inventory. And whilst you're increasing your safety inventory, again, you must go back to your policies, your replenishment policies. You also have to go back to how much it's going to cost to do all this. You also have to go back, to find out how uncertain is the demand, or how uncertain is the supply. How many products can you, substitute? Is there customization with respect to what to do with, or how to increase your safety inventory? Then, of course, when everything has been sorted out, everything has been solved, you have less supply chain disruptions, then comes the question, how do you then go about reducing your safety inventory without having an impact on product availability? So you have to strike a balance. You need to reduce your inventory, because at the end of the day, inventory is money. But then how do you do that and ensure that the products are still available to the end user? So where there's a reduction in demand, supply, and uncertainty, and you are very sure that there's a reduction in this, then yes, go ahead, reduce your safety inventory. Where you recognize that there's client-driven substitution, and again, this goes back to the previous presentations, you have to have the data. So you need to know when your clients begin to substitute products. So once you know this, then again, you reduce on product X and you keep more of Y, or vice versa. Then we have this aspect known as component commonality. It may not be ideal in the pharma industry, but it is one of the ways of reducing your safety inventory. It basically means, for example, if you buy a branded cell phone, and allow me to use Samsung, and you find that a maker of chargers has made a charger which can be used for the Samsung phone, but is not a Samsung charger. And this same charger can be used for other phones, in terms of all other, Android phones. That's what we mean by component commonality, that you have various common parts that you can use for a product. So you don't have to stock a Samsung charger. You can stock a different charger which will serve more than one product. Then where it's possible, you can postpone your delivery, especially if your saved inventory is high or your stock holding is high. Then you look at postponement. But again, when you're looking at postponement, look at how it will impact on the client. Then where the replenishment times, lead times have improved and the variability has improved, then yes, go ahead and reduce your inventory. And then do what is known as continuous inventory monitoring as opposed to periodic inventory monitoring, because this will then allow you to know whether or not there's the client-driven substitution, whether component commonality comes into play, whether postponement will come into play, or whether or not there's actually a real reduction in the uncertainty of demand and supply. Then product substitution, use it to your advantage. Like I said, if it's one brand of paracetamol over another, then you can substitute. But if it's for chronic medication, yeah, always be careful about that. And those are my references. And my take-home message is that, yes, during supply chain disruptions, we can have a part solution. And the part solution to supply chain disruptions is safety inventory. So thank you.
Wow,